We also have to discuss features of the articulated pelvis. So when both os coxa and the sacrum are all coming together and forming the pelvis, they're all put together. There are a few structures that we are going to cover when that's all put together. The first one's called the pubic symphysis. So this is a piece of cartilage in between the two pubic bones, and it's just going to hold them together. So that structure is called the pubic symphysis. The pelvic brim is going to be a ridge of bone, almost looks like a mountain that goes all the way around the inside of the pelvis itself. That's called the pelvic brim. Now, if we acted like the pelvic brim divided the pelvis into two different sections, everything underneath the pelvic brim would be completely surrounded by bone, and that is called the true pelvis, whereas everything above that is only going to be surrounded about 3/4 to a half of the way around. It's surrounded by bone, and in the front of it, there is no bone that surrounds it. So that is called the false pelvis, and that's just everything that's above that pelvic brim. So as we take a look, here is our pubic symphysis. That's what we see, this piece of cartilage in between the two pubic bones holding it together. So we're just going to highlight that just real quick. Right there. And you can actually see the pelvic brim here highlighted with this blue dot right here. So it looks like a mountain ridge just with all the bone put together. That's called the pelvic brim. We'll see a little bit better pictures of the true and false pelvis here in just a moment. So here's a picture of the true pelvis. It's already colored in for you, but it's just the space that's below that pelvic brim. So if you look right here, you'll see that line, that ridge that goes all the way around here. And so everything beneath it that's now highlighted in purple, all that space is called the true pelvis. You can see it's completely surrounded by bone. Whereas everything above it, it doesn't actually have any bone here in the front, and that is called the false pelvis, which is now in this blue-green coloration, just that space that sits above the pelvic brim. Now, also, we have to work on the femur bone, which is going to be the thigh bone. And so this is the largest, strongest, and also it's the longest bone in the body, called the femur. It's got a lot of features on it. It's actually going to articulate onto that acetabulum of the os coxa on each side. So we're going to just discuss the features before we look at pictures here. We have a head, and the head is going to be what physically sits in the acetabulum. It's going to be able to allow the femur to rotate around in that ball and socket joint. The neck is just going to connect the head to the rest of the bone. And then we have our trochanter. So if you'll recall from terminology, a trochanter is a very large, rough bump that's only found on the femur. So the greater trochanter is going to be the bigger one, and it's found on the lateral side, whereas the lesser trochanter is going to be smaller. It's more on the medial posterior side. We also have this big long word next called intertrochanteric. So if we break that word down, remember inter means between, trochanteric means to do with the trochanters, and then our second word here is line. So this is a little rough line that goes between the two trochanters, and this is only found on the front side. It's a lot smaller. On the back side is a much bigger crest, looks like a lip on the back side, and that's called the Intertrochanteric Crest. So if you can find the Intertrochanteric Crest, which is really easy to see, it's this really big, large structure in between the two trochanters, and if you find that, you know you're looking at the back side of the bone. The linea aspera is going to be a mountain ridge that runs just down the posterior shaft of the bone. So if you find linea aspera as well, it's another landmark. You can confirm that you're on the posterior side. Gluteal tuberosity is going to be more lateral on the posterior side, and it's just going to be a rough line. So before we get there, let's just do a real quick drawing to help us visualize what we're going to be looking at. So the linea aspera going down the femur bone is just going to look like this big mountain right on the back of the femur bone. Gluteal tuberosity is going to form one half just like this.